If you had asked me a year ago to describe my family in one word, I would have said orbits. We were a solar system built around one sun, my father Kamaland. The rest of us spun in measured circles. My mother, Samina, lived in a perpetual dawn, soft, warm, endlessly patient. My younger brother, Hamza, burned like a comet. It was all jokes and sparks and sudden bursts of ambition that fizzled out in the atmosphere. And Marania, 29, half the cook, half the counselor, all the glue. I used to believe we were stable. Not perfect, but stable. It's the kind of family that knows how to count plates by memory, how to anticipate the creak of the hallway. Floorboards, how to share silence without turning it into a weapon. That was before our door learned how to betray us. My father was a contractor, the kind who could bargain down a supplier in the morning and charm a client by noon. There was a cracked wall or a leaky ceiling anywhere in the neighborhood. Someone would say, "Call Kamal by, he'll fix it." He wore his reputation like a pressed shirt, crisp, starched, scented faintly of citrus cologne. He had 2 phones, but he said any good businessman did. One for suppliers, one for clients, he would explain, tapping the slippery black case of the second one with a forefinger dusted in plaster powder. It keeps things simple. Simple. That word did a lot of lifting in our house. Dinner was simple. Whatever Mama and I managed between my tutoring sessions and Hamza's erratic study schedule. Holidays were simple. Dad decided where we went, who we saw, what was worth commemorating with a photo and what wasn't. Love was simple. Show respect, swallow your doubts, let the man of the house carry the heaviest thoughts. "You all worry too much," he used to say, smiling like a saint after a long day. "Leave the complicated things to me." Back then, I didn't recognize how complicated he was. On weekdays, I taught English to teenagers who preferred slang. 2 sentences. I liked the job more than I admitted. I liked coaxing shy voices out from behind their teeth. At home, though, I ran interference. When Hamza exploded after failing his practice exam, it was me who gathered the pieces. When Mama worried the gas bill like it was a rosary, clicking her tongue and counting decimals, it was me who assured her dad would handle it tomorrow. When Dad came home with that particular kind of tired loose tie, eyes bright but hard, smile fixed. The tired that meant do not ask about the diet was me who changed the subject fast enough to not seem like I was changing it. "Ronnie, pass the salad," he would say, and I would pass it. And we would pretend that the salad and not the silence was the main course. We had routines. Saturday breakfasts on the balcony where the bougainvillea climbed like a pink waterfall. Friday nights curled around old movies. A Sunday ritual where Dad would drive us through the older part of town, pointing to buildings he swore he'd had a hand in restoring. His voice adopting that proud cadence that made Hamza sit up a little, taller, that once see the cornice. "My team did that," he would say, nodding toward a pale building with balconies like lace. "Back when quality meant something, I'd laugh. Your quality control and nostalgia committee, both." He liked that, the acknowledgement. He'd reach over to ruffle my hair in a way that made me feel 5 and cherished and also smothered. "A father has to be many things," he would say, and then he'd drive on, looking at the road the way a gambler looks at a deck. Maybe I am painting him unfairly. Maybe none of us survive our daughter's retellings. But I can tell you what I saw. A man who loved the performance of family. Who arranged us like flowers at a banquet table and preened at the compliments. "Mashallah, what a beautiful family," people would say. And he would incline his head, with a humility that pressed down like a hand on the back of my neck. It made me straighten. It made me smile wider than I felt. The first crack, if I'm honest, was tiny. A receipt. It fell out of his jacket when I was hanging it after dinner, an older jacket, navy, with a frayed lining he refused to part with. The slip was folded twice and smelled like the heavy peppered cologne he wore to client dinners. A jewelry store. 2 gold bangles, fine filigree, the kind Mama liked to admire in windows but never bought for herself. My heart did that flinch throb gratitude's kusanand. I carefully put the receipt back, telling myself I wouldn't ruin the surprise. When he did gift the bangles to Mama 2 weeks later, she looked embarrassed as if the gold were a set of eyes trained on her from the wrist. "Save them for Eid," she murmured, holding them like birds. He laughed. "What's the point of gifts? You have to quarantine." We all laughed. But inside, a thought scratched at me. 2 bangles. 2. It was the sort of thing you swallow because you were taught not to choke on generosity. The second crack was a voice on the phone. I was changing the water in the vase on the dining table when the second phone lit up on the sideboard. It vibrated itself sideways, little hums like a trapped insect. The screen flashed a name I didn't recognize. Nadia. I called toward the kitchen. "Abu, your phone." No answer. The call cut off, then began again, persistent. On the third buzz, I picked it up, intending to carry it to him. It slid in my hand as if it had somewhere else it would rather be. On reflex, my thumb brushed the answer icon. Hello. Static. Then a woman's voice, low, urgent. "Kamel, you're late." My throat closed. He's not here. A pause expanded into an awkward balloon. Then she said carefully, "Can you tell him I called?" "Who should I say?" She hung up. I stood there with the phone warm against my palm. For a beat, I had the surreal urge to press it to my ear, as if I could hear a heartbeat inside. When Dad came in, drying his hands on a dish towel, I held it out to him. "Rang," I said, a few times. He didn't take it immediately. He wiped a second time, then reached for it, flipping it face down. "Work." "Nadia," I said, trying to sound casual. "New client?" He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Don't be nosy, Ronnie. It doesn't suit you." Should have been nothing. There are 1,000 Nadias in the world. But something in the way he turned the phone face down made me wonder what it would see if it looked back at him. When I told Mama, she tapped the flour off her fingers and sighed in a way that built a bridge across the years. "Men collect complications," she murmured. "And then they call them responsibilities. Leave it." Leave what? Idea that one phone call can tell you the story of a man. "I'm not trying to write a novel about him," I said, too sharp. "I'm just noticing." Her eyes softened. She reached up and smoothed a strand of hair behind my ear. "I noticed too," she said quietly. "I notice more than you think. We had a plan to celebrate my parents' 25th wedding anniversary at home simple, of course, with fairy lights strung across the courtyard and my mother's spinach parcels. And the thinnest china I didn't trust Hamza to carry. Dad insisted on a vow renewal. "Not a big one," he said, making a sweeping gesture that could only be described as big. "Just a few promises, a few witnesses. It will be good for the children to hear us say we choose each other again." "Children?" Hamza snorted, shoving a scoop of rice into his mouth. "I'm 19. You're a child until you pay your own health insurance," Dad said, and everyone chuckled. But the warmth didn't land. The anniversary planning became a week-long choreography. I would come home with arms full of candles and ribbon, and Mama would hide her tiredness behind a smile while we sorted the paper flowers by what looked best near the doorway. Long before the date, Dad had compiled a guest list that seemed to develop its own inflation rate. Every time he mentioned it, it had grown a cousin or 3. "Do we have to invite Kalasanya?" I asked, cautious. "She and Mama, she's family," he said, not looking up from his list. "You'd never uninvite blood. Remember that?" Later, alone in my room, I sat on the floor surrounded by marigolds and string lights and pressed my fingers into my eyes until the world turned starry. To bangles, to phones. I pictured that woman's voice walking through the shape of his name. I tried on the worry like a dress in the mirror, and then I took it off. It didn't fit yet. It hung wrong. A few days before the anniversary, Dad asked me to ride with him to the supplier's market to charm a discount out of a stubborn man. He said it with affection, the way he always did, like he was letting me apprentice with him in the art of getting what you want. The market was a glittery maize fabric, metal, Sudden music, everything threaded together by the scent of frying oil. Dad negotiated. I watched the tilt of his head, the rhythm of his voice. In the car afterward, he was relaxed, tapping the steering wheel in time to a song on the radio. I reached for the glove compartment to find a tissue and my hand fell on. Paper drawing done in thick blue crayon of a house with a triangle roof and a stick figure standing outside. Beneath it, in a wobbly hand, to Baba, a red heart. My stomach dropped and then floated. I held the drawing up like it might be contagious. "This is cute," I said, aiming for lightness and landing too hard. "Which of your client's kids gave you this?" He glanced over too quickly. One of the boys at the site. They were playing with scrap paper. "It says to Baba," he chuckled, and it sounded like a cut that hadn't clotted yet. "You know how kids are. Everyone's an uncle, everyone's a father. Give me that, it'll get wrinkled." I folded the drawing back into the compartment, careful not to tear the heart. He turned up the radio and we let the song do the talking. That night, Mama and I ironed the tablecloths. She smoothed a wrinkle with exaggerated care, the iron hissing like a whisper. "Do you ever feel like we're playing house?" I asked. "Like we're setting a stage, and when the curtain falls, someone else comes out and takes the bows." She looked at me in the way mothers do when they are trying to parse whether a question is a complaint in makeup. "You're nervous," she said. "It's all right. Big events always make us nervous. If you were the same before your board exams, you wouldn't sit still. If you reorganized your pencils until you could see your reflection in them." "This is different," I said, softly. "I'm not afraid of the event. I'm afraid of what might show up to it." She set the iron upright and it made a small, steady sound, a reminder that heat can be contained. "Then we will face it," she said. "Whatever shows up, we will face it together." The morning of the anniversary, the house felt like a chest inhaling. Lights went up, plates multiplied. I woke up early and baked the cardamom cake Mama used to make when Hamza and I were little. The one that always took a bit longer than the recipe promised. Hamza came down, hair sticking up, hands already grabbing for crumbs. "No," I said, swatting him. "Save your appetite for public applause." He grinned. "Public applause makes me hungrier." Dad strode into the kitchen with a box. In his hands, wrapped in thick gold paper. "It's for your mother," he announced. "A surprise." The word surprise did a small, mean dance on my tongue. I smiled anyway. "She'll love it." "She will," he said, then put the box on top of the fridge as if it needed altitude to be impressive. "Remember, both of you, tonight is about respect. None of your sarcasm," he pointed at Hamza, "and none of your questions." He aimed vaguely at me. "We are celebrating our family, full stop. Who's coming again?" I asked, too breezy, "Just so I know. How many chairs to set?" He rattled off names, aunties and uncles and cousins, who always arrived with advice disguised as dessert. Then he added, "And the Sadiqas, old client. It's bringing his wife and their daughter about your age." "Cool," I said. "Add an extra spoon for my future best friend." He smirked. "Behave," he said, but there was an edge. "This is not a networking event for you?" Sometimes he said things that made me feel like I was on a stage with a mark I had to hit or else the floor would open. I nodded, tucked my chin, let the line pass. In the late afternoon, a courier arrived with a smaller box wrapped in the same thick gold paper. He handed it to me, and I recognized the jewelry store logo from that receipt. My fingers trembled as I signed the delivery form. I carried the box to my room instead of putting it with the other gifts. I shouldn't have opened it, I know that, but the lid seemed to half open itself, just enough to swallow a moment of restraint. Inside lay a bracelet delicate, a chain of tiny gold leaves. A card sat tucked beneath the velvet. "For Samina, with love, Kay." It was exactly the kind of thing Mama would claim was too much and were anyway. Except tanned here is where the panic inserted itself. like a blade. This box wasn't the shape of the one on top of the fridge. That one had been square, a bangle box. This was rectangular. 2 pieces, 2 gold gifts for one woman. Or 2. Stop it, I told myself, pressing the lid back down like it might spill. Stop building an entire storm out of a few wicked clouds. When Mama came in to ask about the napkin folds, I hid the box behind my back like a teenage confession. She looked at me, puzzled. I set the box on my desk and forced a laugh. "A courier," I said, "from the store." Her face went still in that way that makes eyes look older. "Your father likes gold more than I do. Maybe he likes how it looks on you," I said. "Maybe he likes how it looks on him. When it's on me," she answered and went back to her lists. I stood there, the little box a pulse on my desk. I wanted to be generous. I wanted to imagine a man who'd saved for a quarter century to buy his wife, to golden apologies for the years he had been absent even when present. But generosity felt like a door that swung both ways. Once you pushed it open too many times, anything could walk in. By 5, the house thrummed. Fairy lights caught on the edges of the trellis and transformed our ordinary courtyard into something almost tender. Our neighbor, old Mr. Iqbal, delivered a tray of sweets with a blessing that made Mama breathe out. Finally, Hamza set up the Bluetooth speaker and rehearsed Dad's favorite song 3 times until I threatened to bury the device under the potted basil. Dad showered and reappeared in a crisp white kurta that made him look like a younger photograph of himself. He kissed Mama's forehead in front of us with an almost exaggerated affection, and her cheeks turned the color of guava flesh. "We are ready," he declared. "Tonight we remember why we said yes and why we keep saying it." I moved through the rooms like a stagehand, checking lights, spilling water jugs, laying the napkins like petals. The sun began to fall down the side of the sky. Voices approached from the street. The doorbell rehearsed its jingle and then performed. We opened the door to smiles and perfume and heavy bangles. Our tiny house expanded to contain them. Eyes darted to mine across the room like little boats. "We could do this, Raina?" My Aunt Sonia swooped in, all lipstick and opinions. "Finally, you've learned to tie your hair properly. You always used to look so artistic." She sniffed the word like it had gone off. "No marriage prospects if you insist on that bohemian look." "Kala," I said, forcing a grin. "We are celebrating vows, not hunting new ones." She pinched my cheek, sharp enough to bruise. "Girls these days," she muttered, then turned to exclaim over the fairy lights as if she had invented them. The Siddiquis arrived. Their daughter Marnur smiled shyly in a pale blue dress. She had the face of someone who apologized before she spoke. Dad greeted Mr. Siddiqui like a politician greeting a sponsor, warm, firm, measured enough to be quoted later. He held the room in his hands like it was a cigarette he knew how to flick without burning. Dinner was planned for 7, so the vow renewal for 8. At 6:30, Dad took the box from the top of the fridge and tucked it behind the cushion of the sofa, the way children hide chocolates they think will taste better if discovered. At 6:40, he pulled me aside near the hallway. "Remember," he said, "no dramatics." I wasn't planning on juggling. He exhaled through his nose. "Don't be clever, Ronnie. It doesn't make you smarter. It makes you difficult." The word landed like a coin in a jar that had been quietly filling for years. Difficult. I wanted to hold the jar up and rattle it. Make him hear the sound of all the times I had been difficult for noticing, for asking, for wanting. To be treated like someone who could handle the truth. "I'll be good," I said, because I had learned that sometimes survival sounds like surrender. By 7, the courtyard was a low hum of relatives trying to one-up each other with benevolence. Mama moved like a river through them, offering plates and smiles and the kind of attention that turns a person into a room everyone wants to stand in. She was beautiful in a green. Sorry, Dad had chosen a compliment that felt like a note pinned to her back. Every few minutes, Dad would lift his chin and scan the crowd, counting presences the way a cruise captain counts lifeboats. The Siddiquis admired the lights, and Sonia found fault with the rice. Hamza flirted with Marnur in a way that made me want to hand them both helmets. I brought out the cardamom cake, and people clucked their tongues in appreciation. It was a family party. It was ordinary. It was ours. And yet I kept glancing at the gate as if expectation could conjure a shape beneath it. The air held a pressure like pre-monsoon. My father laughed from deep in his throat, and the sound didn't make me feel safe. I watched him lean toward Mr. Siddiqui, hand on shoulder, whispering some anecdote that made the older man throw his head back. 2 bangles, my mind repeated, a metronome under the music, 2 phones. A blue crayon heart that spelled out a child's claim. At 7:45, I slipped into the kitchen to breathe. Mama followed with a stack of plates balanced impossibly on one arm. "You're pale," she said, tilting her head. "Eat something." "I will," I lied. "How are you?" She smiled, and her eyes went glossy for a second. "Nervous, like a bride," she said softly. "Isn't that silly?" "Not silly," I said. "You're doing something brave." Saying yes again is sometimes braver than saying it the first time. She set the plates down and took my hands. "Whatever happens," she said, and I swear her voice dipped into some deep water I couldn't name. "Remember that I chose you, too, from the moment they put you in my arms and you blinked like you were irritated by the world. I chose you, and I keep choosing you." "Mama," I whispered, choking on the sudden tenderness. "Stop, you'll make me cry on the samosas." We laughed. We stood there a moment, 2 women holding the rope between us, taut and strong. Then a sound threaded into the laughter from the front gate so ordinary it cut straight through me. A knock, not the doorbell, not a neighbor's call. A knock that was decisive and practiced, like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, run-on sentence. I looked at Mama. She looked at me. She glanced toward the courtyard, where Dad's voice rose above the chatter, about to make a toast. Knock sounded again. 3 sharp notes on wood here. Here. Herein the whole house paused, just for a breath, as if it recognized the rhythm of an ending, walking toward it. I wiped my hands on a towel that now felt too thin, and started toward the door. I can still hear the sound of that knock. Not loud enough to frighten, but deliberate enough to silence. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission, it declares presence. I moved through the crowd of relatives in the courtyard, balancing my polite smile like a tray I couldn't spill. Dad was mid-toast, his glass raised, everyone's eyes on him. He didn't even notice the sound at first. But Mama's hand froze mid-gesture, holding a bowl of rice, her knuckles whitening as if the porcelain weighed 100 pounds. I reached the gate, my heartbeat colliding with my ribs, and pulled it open. There they stood. A woman in her early 40s, her features carved with a dignity that hadn't been invited tonight. Beside her, 2 teenagers, a girl with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, and a boy who couldn't stop fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. The woman's sari was plain, almost austere, but her eyes carried something I hadn't prepared for. Certainty. "Is Kamal here?" she asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. For a moment I couldn't answer. The courtyard noise softened behind me, like the world itself was holding its breath. Yes, he's here. Who are you?" Before she could reply, Hamza nosy as ever slipped in behind me. His jaw dropped. Ronnie, why do they look like—" The woman straightened her shoulders. "I'm Farah," she said, "and these are my children. Your father is also their father." The words didn't just land, they detonated. Behind us, laughter faltered into silence. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. Dad's glass froze halfway down from his lips. Every relative turned, faces tilting in the same direction, eyes narrowing, calculating. The fairy lights above flickered like they were deciding whether to witness this. For a second, I wanted to slam the gate shut. To protect Mama. To protect Hamza, to protect myself. But my hand wouldn't move, 'cause some part of me's small stubber had already known. 2 bangles, 2 phones, a blue crayon heart. The girl, maybe 16, uncrossed her arms and snapped. "We're not here to play games, Baba." The word Baba hit harder than the knock had. Gasps traveled like gossip through the courtyard. Aunt Sanya's hand flew to her chest like she was auditioning for an opera. The Sadiqus exchanged glances, eyes gleaming with the kind of scandal that would be dinner table fuel for months. Inside, Dad barked suddenly, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. He strode toward the gate, trying to herd them inside, like unruly sheep. Not here, not like this. But the damage was done. The words had escaped into the open air, and no amount of corralling could shove them back. Mama placed the rice bowl down on the nearest table, her movements slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to drop a secret. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes steady on Dad. "Kamal," she said, voice trembling only at the edges. "What are they saying?" Dad's jaw clenched. "Not here, Samina. Later. Later," she echoed, her voice louder this time. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone, and you want to wait until later?" Farah stepped forward, her chin lifted. "He promised us he'd tell you. Years ago, but he never did." She turned to Mama. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't fair. But we've been living in the shadows while you lived in the light." "Children deserve acknowledgement," the girl added bitterly. "We deserve a father who doesn't pretend we don't exist." Whispers erupted among the relatives. Some shook their heads. Others leaned in like hungry spectators at a boxing match. Aunt Sonia, ever the vulture, muttered loud enough for half the crowd to hear. "Astaghfirullah, Kamal, 2 families, 2 wives. Shame." Mr. Sadiqui cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, and whispered something to his wife, who grabbed their daughter's hand and tugged her toward the gate. They weren't going to stay for the fallout. They'd already collected enough scandal to last a decade. Dad tried to raise his hands for calm. "Isn't the time, Farah? You should have called me first." Farah laughed without humor. "Called, you stopped answering months ago. My son needed school fees. Do you remember? You said you'd handle it. You disappeared." The boy, he couldn't have been more than 14, finally spoke up, voice cracking. "We had to sell Mama's bangles." That silenced even the whispers. Mama swayed slightly, as if the ground had shifted under her. I darted forward and steadied her by the elbow. Her face looked carved from glass, fragile, breakable, but still whole. She turned slowly toward Dad, her lips trembling. "Is it true? Samina, please answer me," she snapped. Her voice cracked through the courtyard like thunder. The hush that followed was unbearable. Even the children who had been running around earlier now froze, sensing the storm. Dad's lips moved, but no words came. His silence was the loudest confession of all. Mama's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't sob, not yet. She just stared at him like she was seeing a stranger wearing her husband's face. Farah folded her arms. "We didn't come to destroy your anniversary, but we couldn't stay silent anymore. Kemal, either you acknowledge your other children, or we'll make sure the world knows." Aunt Sonia clucked her tongue dramatically. "The world already knows," she whispered, loud enough to sting. Hamza, who until now had been frozen, suddenly exploded. "So you've been lying to us? To all of us? All those nights you said you were working late? Were you with them?" His finger jabbed toward the teenagers, who looked away, equally angry but embarrassed. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Mama?" Dad snapped. "Enough." But his voice cracked, desperate. "I finally found my own. It's not enough. It's not nearly enough. You stood in front of us all these years preaching about respect, about family, about loyalty. And all the while, you were, what? Building a second home. Playing father twice." His eyes darted between me, Mama, and Farah. For once, the man who always had words found himself wordless. Mama lifted her chin, tears streaking her face, but her dignity unbroken. You wanted a vow renewal tonight, Kamal? A promise before God and family. Tell me, which family were you planning to vow to? Or were you hoping we'd all merge together like some empire you control? The courtyard erupted into murmurs again. Some relatives excused themselves, scandal clinging to their shawls. Others stayed, feeding on the spectacle. The fairy lights swayed in the night air, casting strange shadows across Dad's face. And in that moment, I realized something devastating. This wasn't just his humiliation. It was ours too. Mama's, Hamza's, mine. We weren't just spectators. We were collateral damage. Every whisper, every widened eye, every pitying glance, those were knives aimed at us as much as him. Mama suddenly turned and walked inside, her steps firm despite the tears. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Hamza followed, muttering curses under his breath. I stayed rooted by the gate, torn between them and the woman and children still standing outside, holding their pain like banners. Farah's voice softened. We didn't come to fight, Urania. We just want the truth in the open. I looked at her, at the girl glaring defiantly, at the boy clutching his backpack like a shield. My throat ached. The truth, I whispered, has burned our house down tonight. And then I shut the gate. But the whispers stayed. The shame stayed. And the echo of that girl's word, Baba, kept bouncing inside my skull, sharp enough to slice. The earthquake, then what came next was the aftershock that cracked the very foundation of my world. The night of the anniversary ended in Shard's guests scattering, gossip buzzing like flies. Mama locked in her room, Kamza pacing the courtyard, like a guard dog who had lost his master. Dad didn't even try to explain. He just sat in the living room, head in his hands, the man who once commanded every conversation reduced to silence. I wanted to scream at him, to hurl every suspicion I had ever swallowed back in his face. But my voice refused to rise. It was as if the shame had stuffed itself down my throat. So instead, I cleaned. I picked up the plates, the discarded napkins, the half-eaten samosas, as if restoring order on the surface could glue together what had been broken beneath. The next morning, Mama emerged, her eyes swollen but her posture regal. She made tea, for herself, only for herself, and sat at the table without a word. Dad tried to speak. Samina, please, let me explain. She didn't even look at him. You had 25 years to explain. Her words sliced cleaner than any knife. For days, our house became a silent battlefield. Hamza cursed Dad whenever he passed him. Mama ignored him completely. And me. I walked the thin line between them, my insides churning with questions. Who was this woman? Farah? Was she truly his wife, or just someone he had strung along? And the children, were they really my half-siblings? Or pawns in some cruel game? I couldn't rest until I knew. So one afternoon, when Dad left for work, a word now hollow as an empty shell, I took matters into my own hands. I remembered the drawing in his glove compartment, the blue crayon, the shaky handwriting. That child hadn't been lying. And if that drawing was real, so were they. I tracked Farah down. It wasn't difficult. Our city was big, but gossip traveled faster than any car. A shopkeeper down the street, eager to sip the scandal, gave me an address. People have been whispering, he said, eyes glittering. Poor woman raising children in that tiny flat while your father, he stopped himself, embarrassed. Fa was in an older part of town, cracked walls, laundry fluttering like weary flags. My hand trembled as I knocked. Farah opened the door. She didn't look surprised to see me. Perhaps she had been expecting this. Urania, she said softly. I nodded. May I come in? The flat was small but tidy. The girl Amina sat on the couch with a book in her lap, glaring at me with the fury only teenagers can conjure. The boy Bill peeked from behind the curtain, his curiosity too strong for his shyness. I didn't come to fight. said, my voice shaking despite my intent. I need to know. Farah gestured for me to sit. She poured water into a chipped glass and handed it to me. Then she began. I met Kamal 20 years ago. He told me he was married, yes, but he said his marriage was loveless. He said he was staying for duty, not for love. I was young, stupid enough to believe him. He promised me he'd never abandon me, that he would find a way for both families to exist. She laughed bitterly. Exist. As if we were inventory in his storeroom. Were you married? I asked hesitantly. She nodded. Nikah witnesses everything, but not registered legally. He said it would be complicated. He said it would only hurt Samina if it was official. My chest tightened. All those times he had lectured us about honesty, about integrity, and this was the man behind the curtain. Farah looked me in the eyes. I stayed because he gave me hope. And because of them. She nodded toward her children. They are his blood, Rania, just like you. Amina snapped her book shut. We're tired of being secrets. We're tired of him pretending we're mistakes. Her anger burned into me. For the first time, I didn't feel rage toward them. I felt rage toward him, because they hadn't asked for this. They hadn't asked to live in the shadows. But Farah wasn't finished. Her next words tipped the world further on its axis. Do you know why I came that night? She asked. I shook my head. She leaned forward, voice low. Because he promised my daughter's dowry was ready. He swore he'd saved enough. But when I asked him last month, he avoided me. Then I found out he bought gold for your mother. 2 sets, for her. While we were drowning, the room spun. 2 sets, 2 boxes. My stomach lurched. Amina's face flushed with humiliation. I can't even get engaged because we can't afford it. My friends laugh at me. Baba pretends we don't exist. Tears stung. My eyes, the gold on Mama's dresser, flashed in my memory like a cruel mirror. My father hadn't just betrayed us. He had stolen from one family to glorify the other. And then came the final twist of the knife. Farah pulled out a folded paper from her drawer and handed it to me. It was a birth certificate. Billows under father's name, Kamal Ahmed. Under mother's name, Farah Begum. Proof, black ink. Government seal, undeniable. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My throat closed, my hands shaking. Farah's voice softened. I'm not here to ruin your life, Rania, but you deserve the truth. You deserve to know who your father really is. I left there flat in a haze. The streets blurred around me. My father's lies pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. But beneath the shame, beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred. Something sharp, electric. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was resolve. I wasn't going to let him bury this truth again. He'd humiliated us. Humiliated Mama, turned our lives into a stage play for his ego. But now I had the evidence. Now I had the weapon. And I knew exactly when to use it. Because 2 days later, my father was invited to speak at a community banquet. The very stage where he loved to boast about family, honor, and legacy. The same stage where every influential relative and neighbor would be seated. The perfect place to peel off his mask. I'd never been to one of those grand community banquets alone before. Usually, it was Dad striding in, Mama trailing behind in quiet grace, Hamza rolling his eyes at the endless speeches, and me keeping the small talk afloat with polite laughter. We were always introduced as Kamal's family, the shining evidence of his success and stability. But that night, I walked in with Mama at my side, her green dupatta pinned firmly as armor. Hamza close enough that his shoulder brushed mine like a warning. Don't let go of me, no matter what happens. The hall smelled of roses and cardamom tea, the chandeliers glittering like false stars. Round tables filled the space, each draped in satin, each buzzing with chatter. On the stage, a long table was set for the honored guests' business. Leaders, religious figures, and of course, Dad. He was already there, laughing too loudly, gesturing with that confident sweep of his hand. For a moment, I almost believed the last 2 weeks hadn't happened, that the knock on our door, the other family, Faraz's confession, the birth certificate, all of it was just a fever dream. But then he saw us. His smile faltered. He hadn't expected us to come. I raised my chin and met his eyes with a steadiness I didn't know I had. The speeches began. Men in crisp suits droned on about community, progress, legacy. Dad listened with the smile of a man who thought he was the center of gravity. Finally, the host called his name, Kamal Ahmed, pillar of integrity, devoted husband, father, and leader. The words stabbed through me. Integrity, devoted father. Dad stood, smoothing his kurta, and walked to the podium. The applause swelled around him. My stomach churned. Mama's fingers tightened on her glass of water until it trembled. Hamza muttered under his breath, "This is it." And then Dad began. "My dear friends," he said, voice booming with practiced warmth, "family is the cornerstone of our lives. Without family, we are nothing. Tonight, I stand before you humbled, grateful for 25 years of marriage, for 2 wonderful children who honor me every day, and for the blessings God has showered upon us." The audience clapped politely. He smiled that rehearsed smile, scanning the crowd, pausing for effect. That was my cue. I rose to my feet. The scraping of my chair against the marble echoed louder than I expected. All eyes turned. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break through my ribs, but my voice came clear, steady. "You forgot to mention your other family, Dad." The silence was instant, electric, like someone had cut the wires to the entire hall. Dad's face drained of color. "Rania, sit down," he hissed into the microphone, his voice amplified for all to hear. But I didn't sit. I held up the folded paper I'd been carrying in my bag like a loaded gun. "For years, you lectured us about loyalty, about honesty, about honor. But here's the truth everyone deserves to know." I unfolded it slowly, deliberately. "This is Billow's birth certificate. His father's name, Kamal Ahmed. That's you, his mother. Farah Begum, that's not Mama." Gasps rippled across the hall like waves crashing against rocks. Dad stumbled forward, hands raised. "This is slander. Lies." My voice cracked with fury. "Then why did Farah show me the NICA papers? Why did she tell me about the promises you made? Why did your daughter Amina have to stand at our gate on Mama's anniversary and call you Baba while you pretended you didn't know her?" The room erupted. People whispering, some rising from their chairs for a better view. Aunt Sonia, ever the gossip, clutched her pearls like she'd just discovered a corpse. The host of the evening looked horrified, frozen in place. Dad slammed his palm on the podium. "Nuff, you don't know what you're saying, girl." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying," I shot back, my voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "I'm saying you are a liar, a coward. You built 2 families and forced one to live in the shadows while you paraded us around like trophies. You gave Mama bangles while you let Farah's daughter suffer in silence. You let your son beg for school fees while you smiled on stages like this one." Mama rose beside me then. She didn't speak, but her presence, dull, steady, wounded but unbroken, spoke louder than anything I could have said. She slipped her hand into mine. For the first time in days, she looked directly at Dad. "You wanted a vow renewal," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Here is mine. I vow never to let you humiliate me again." The hall thundered with murmurs, some gasps, some claps, from those bold enough to support her. Hamza stormed forward, his fingers stabbing the air toward Dad. "You don't get to call yourself my father anymore. Fathers protect. Fathers don't gamble with their families like playing cards. You chose yourself over and over. Well, now we choose ourselves." Dad's face collapsed, pride crumbling into desperation. He reached for the microphone, his voice pleading now instead of commanding. "Please, stop this. You'll ruin Me, I stepped closer, my eyes burning into his. You ruined yourself the day you thought you could hide us from each other. You ruined yourself when you forgot that the truth always knocks. The audience was no longer silent. Some jeered. Some shouted words like betrayal and shame. Others looked away, unwilling to witness a man stripped bare. And then, like fate had been waiting for its cue, the back doors of the hall opened. Farah walked in, Amina and Bilal at her sides. Gasps turned to shrieks. It was no longer rumor. Was reality walking on 2 feet? Dad's knees buckled. He tried to step down from the stage, but the spotlight pinned him in place like an insect. Farah didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was the final nail in his coffin. The host tried to regain order, banging on the microphone. Please, please, this is not the place, but it was too late. The hall had turned into a courtroom, and the verdict was written on every face, staring at Dad with disgust, pity, or both. Mama turned to me, her hand tightening on mine. For the first time, I saw something new in her eyes, not just heartbreak, but freedom. And I knew then justice wasn't always a gavel or a sentence. Sometimes, justice was simply the mask shattering. In front of the world, Dad had spent years crafting his image. That night, I ripped it away, and there was no coming back from it. The banquet broke apart like a ship hitting rocks. Chairs scraped, voices rose, and people hurried to leave, clutching their shawls and coats as if they could shield themselves from the scandal they'd just witnessed. Some lingered, whispering in corners, eager to carry the story out into the city. But I didn't care about them. I watched my father, our father, collapse into his seat on the stage, the microphone still hissing faint feedback beside him. His head hung low, his hands trembling. The confident man who once demanded respect, reduced to a hollow shell. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt vindicated. Mama tugged gently at my arm. Come, she whispered. We don't owe this place our tears. Hamza was already storming toward the exit, muttering curses under his breath. Farah stood by the door, her children flanking her like soldiers, her eyes locked on Dad. She didn't look triumphant, only weary, like someone who had carried a burden too long and finally set it down. As we passed, she nodded to me. Not a thank you, not a smile, just an acknowledgement, woman to woman, that the truth was finally in the open. The next morning, the newspapers didn't carry his name, thank God, but the whispers had already spread. Relatives called Mama one by one, some to console, some to probe, some to remind her politely. Cruelly, that divorce was an option. She didn't answer most of them. She spent her morning in the courtyard watering her plants as if nothing had happened, though I saw the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking. Hamza was furious. We should throw him out, he said over breakfast, slamming his mug on the table. He doesn't deserve this house. Doesn't deserve us. Dad had slept on the sofa, or rather tossed and turned there until dawn. When he shuffled into the kitchen, his face gray, Hamza spat. Get out, Hamza, Mama said softly, but he wouldn't stop. You ruined everything. You lied to us, to Mama, to me, to Rania. You don't get to sit here and pretend we're family anymore? Dad opened his mouth, then shut it again. His silence was worse than any excuse. I put a hand on Hamza's shoulder. Let him hear it, I said quietly. Let him feel it. Dad finally looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. Rania, please. The plea broke something in me. For 4 years, I'd been the one smoothing things over, carrying his pride, filling in the cracks. But not anymore. No, I said, my voice steady. You don't get to beg now. You begged Farah for forgiveness. You begged Mama for patience. You begged us for silence. We gave it to you. And you repaid us with humiliation. His lips trembled. I thought I could manage both. I thought you were invincible, I snapped. But you weren't. You were selfish. Okay. And you made all of us pay the price. The days that followed weren't easy. Neighbors stared. Relatives circled like vultures, offering advice we didn't want. Some said Mama should leave. Some said she should stay for the children's sake. But Mama made her own choice. One evening, she gathered Hamza and me in the living room. Dad sat apart, silent. Mama spoke with a calm that hushed us both. "I will not divorce him," she said. "Not yet. But I will not live as his ornament either. From now on, Kamal will live separately. He may provide, he may visit, but this house belongs to me, to my children. I will not share my table with deceit." Her voice didn't waver. For the first time, she was no longer orbiting him. She was her own center of gravity. Dad nodded, tears slipping down his face. "I will do whatever you ask," Good Mama said. "Because you will never again dictate what respect looks like. Respect must be earned." Weeks passed. Slowly, the house began to heal. Hamza poured himself into his studies, determined to outgrow the shadow of his father's scandal. Mama found strength in routine cooking, teaching neighborhood children, laughing more freely than I'd seen in years. And me, I learned to tell the story. Not to everyone, not for gossip, but to myself. I wrote it in a journal, every detail. Knock, the bangles, the birth certificate, the banquet. I wrote until the shame drained out of me, until the anger softened into clarity. One day, Farah called. "Thank you," she said simply, "for speaking when I couldn't." I swallowed hard. It wasn't bravery. It was survival. She sighed. Sometimes they're the same thing. Looking back now, I realize the greatest betrayal wasn't just the second family. It was the silence. The secrets he let rot between us until they erupted. Secrets are termites. They eat away at love, at trust, at dignity, until all that's left is dust. But here's the lesson I carry. Truth, no matter how brutal, is always kinder than lies, because the truth gives you a chance to rebuild. Lies only leave you standing in ruins, wondering when the ground fell away. I don't know if my father will ever be the man he pretended to be. I don't know if Farah's children will ever forgive him, or if Hamza will ever call him Abu again. But I do know this. Mama, Hamza, and we faced the storm, and we're still standing. And me, I no longer orbit around anyone. I am my own center now. That's the real justice. That's the ending he never saw coming. And that was my story. My dad's secret nearly destroyed us, but the truth set us free. What would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story gripped you, don't forget to hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves dramatic stories, and subscribe so you don't miss the next twist-filled tale of betrayal, revenge, and justice. Until next time, remember, lies can hide in the dark, but the truth always knocks.